And by the way, Brent, I think I'm a little heated on this topic in general. Right before we logged down, I read this story on the Reddit r trans. My little one, 3 years old, started to express that she feels like a girl. She feels more like mommy than daddy. She is asked to be called a new name and wants to use pronouns of she, her. This is a little boy, by the way. It has been a few months since she changed her name. We want to make sure that if she is trans, she feels loved and supported. Is there anything we should do to help with this? We are respecting her name and pronoun choices and helping others to do so as well. She hasn't expressed any desire for a wardrobe change other than a few dresses, which she got before she changed her name. Thanks. Like that right there, man, that just, it makes my blood boil because I have a 14-month-old. I just couldn't imagine being this parent and putting this as my perspective, man. It makes me sick.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on The Brian Nichols Show. Thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by our friends over at AMP America. Folks, get all the news you need to know without the corporate media bias or fluff. Head to ampamerica.com. We have news pieces, we have opinion pieces, we have podcasts, and more. One more time, AMP America. Also, the Brian Nichols Show is powered, and yours truly powered by our studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle. Folks, if you are looking for the best heart health supplement in the world, it will lower your blood pressure. It will help lower your resting heart rate while improving your sleep and increasing that pump at the gym and a slew of other amazing benefits. Stick around. We're going to talk about Cardio Miracle later in the episode. But for today, we're not talking about anything from a policy. Well, we will talk policy, but not anything specific in terms of solution-oriented stuff that we talk about here in the show quite frequently, but rather inside baseball time. Now, rewind, a week and a half or so ago, I did an episode talking about why I am just so frustrated with the greater libertarian movement, and the overall theme of that episode was libertarians suck at sales. Now, this all kind of was culminated, by the whole Chase Oliver winning the LP nomination here at the Libertarian Party convention back about 3 weeks or so ago, and the ensuing backlash from said nomination, not just internally in the Libertarian Party, but also externally with some very large voices in the podcast space, and most recently over on Tim Pool's The Culture War podcast, where Jeremy Kauffman, Karen Ann Harlos, and we had, who else was? Oh yeah, Michael Rechtenwald, the guy who was the Mises caucus chosen candidate to hopefully lead the LP to success in 2024, who was, yes, defeated by Chase Oliver at that convention. So they had a roundtable conversation with Tim Pool as well as Phil Labonte from Timcast, and they talked about what happened and where is the Libertarian Party moving right now. And to help discuss that in some detail today, plus maybe where we can get better, where we can learn from some stuff, not necessarily in terms of how to be better libertarians, but how to effectively communicate our ideas, build coalitions, and actually, talk to people who want to hear what we have to sell. So joining us today from the Aiming Up podcast, host Brent M. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing, my man?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you on the show. And that is, yes, elephant in the room, after I appeared on your podcast back a few weeks ago. And man, it was a blast. So Brent, do us a favor, introduce yourself here to the Brian Nichols Show audience. And what would our guests find if they go over to Aiming Up podcast and listen to yours truly?
Yeah, thanks for that, man. I really did enjoy our first conversation.
Likewise.
Thanks for appearing, man. That was great. At Aiming Up, the entire focus of it is aiming up, right? So it's about improving yourself and improving the world through having conversations like these, right? So it's not going to be a single issue podcast. It's not a niche sort of thing. Basically it's anything I'm interested in with the intention of improvement, right? Self-improvement, societal improvement, right? So that's a philosophy, whether it's going to be, I do some tech topics, right? I'm a tech executive by day. So I'm interested in tech things, health and fitness, nutrition, supplementation, like all across the board. But my real, what's nearest and dearest to me really is philosophy. right? Particularly moral philosophy around. So I'm kind of a nerd in that space, and that's how I'm sort of plugged into the libertarian, spaces, right? So I come from a position where, initiating force and fraud is completely verboten according to, what I can deduce about the moral philosophy, and it starts and ends there with me. So that's the quick tour.
And that's really a lot of the stuff we dug into on the show. And by the way, you challenged me on some stuff, and I really appreciated that, because too often, Brent, an elephant in the room, right? Libertarians, pardon the expression, really like this whole circle jerk that we have when we go and we sit together talking about issues, talking about economics and policies and problems we see in the world. We like to pat each other on the back and say, oh yeah, your idea is the best. In reality, it's only the best in our little world, right? And we have zero ability to communicate that to a larger audience. And I think right now we look at what just happened with the LP nomination and the ensuing backlash, and we're facing that reality head first. And this goes to the conversation I wanted to have with you today, right? Is let's talk about where not just the Libertarian Party, but the libertarian movement is in 2024 and where we're heading as we go beyond the election in November. And I think it really does come down to something you hinted at in terms of not just talking about the podcast, but also you personally, where you get value. And that's talking about the morals, the principle of libertarianism. And with that, where we sometimes, and pardon the expression again, we let autism get in the way. and I think this speaks to where today's conversation, we're going to have a lot of fun, because one of the main points of contention, and let's just call it out for what it is, with the Chase Oliver candidacy, is that despite his libertarian credentials, right? Yes, he ran for U.S. Senate in Georgia as a big L libertarian. He got a number of votes. But let's talk about Chase, not just his role as a libertarian, but as what he represents. And I look at Chase, and again, I've had Chase in the show. I think he's probably a good guy. I really didn't get to know him too well, candidly. But when you look at what's promoted from Chase to the public, with the libertarianism, it is a cultural leftism, a moral leftism. That's what I see. And what I see, and to just make sure folks don't think I'm just calling this shit out here for no reason, you look at how Chase approached the COVID-19 insanity, right? With this tacit admission that we need to put masks on our face at all times, even when you are walking outside and not around anybody, or, hey, we're going to be very, very, very safe for Thanksgiving. I'm only going to have 5 people over and make sure we're all socially distanced and wearing masks, or just this tacit acceptance that we can bring or what they call it, gender affirming care. I'm using very, very big air quotes for the audio listener here. But like the idea of gender affirming care, where I think I look at it as a dad and I say, oh, you mean you're sexually mutilating a child? Okay, gotcha. Let's call it for what it is. That's what I see, at least right now. I know there are a lot of folks in the libertarian world who say, Brian, you're completely wrong. You look at this issue and you're letting your principles, or rather, you let your morals impact your principles here. Libertarians need to be hands off on everything. Live and let live. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. Which I agree with it. Don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, Brent. But I really have issue with this live and let live, because this live and let live mentality is exactly what got us to where we are today. This idea that I can't have an opinion against somebody else's way of life, when I look at it and say, I fundamentally, foundationally disagree with it. And not saying it's impacting me directly, but it's impacting the place I live, i.e. society, right? I want to be able to bring my daughter out to an event and not have to worry about seeing some grown man waving his genitals around at a pride parade saying this is progress. It's not progress. I look at it as actually very much a backwards approach to how we should be engaging with each other. So that is the starting off point of where I have had some frustrations, and where frustrations over on the Culture War podcast really were expressed between the folks in the panel. So before we go into some specifics, Brent, all that I said, did I get some stuff wrong? Did I get some stuff right? Give me your feedback.
It's not about you got some stuff wrong or right. I think it's going to be, oh, I'm getting a bunch of feedback. Why do
I hear you great.
Okay, cool. It's feeding back to me. So I'm going to try to, actually, I'm going to take this out while I'm speaking. So I'm not getting the feedback right now. It's not about right or wrong, like as far as what you got right. I think it's in two camps for me, right? I have two sort of categories of things. One is, what are ethical concerns, right? And this goes back to like the non-aggression principle, like what, fundamentally, what can you do without committing a ethical violation? And then the second component is that culture war thing that you talked about, right? Which I think if we appropriately had things in the right category with respect to ethics, you would have a lot easier time dealing with the culture war issues, right? So it's the whole tragedy, the commons thing, because most people would say, hey, man, if you want to have a gay pride parade and do all sorts of crazy stuff and you're consenting adults on your own private property, right? Like, knock yourself out, right? But we don't live in that world. And I think that's where things get mixed up and things get confusing for people, because we don't live in that world. It's not Ancapistan, quote unquote, right? We don't live there. So I acknowledge that is one of the fundamental drivers of the culture war.
Hey, folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical. But after using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80. And my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s. And I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle, and how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at the Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show.
And I'm not saying the culture war isn't important. It definitely is. I struggle sometimes when libertarians engage in culture war battles because, number one, I think they're ginned up on purpose. There's a lot of people that want to keep people fighting amongst ourselves,
Absolutely.
right? Around things that are, I don't want to say they're unimportant because they're not unimportant. And there are real harms around a lot of culture war topics. But it's something that is very easy to fall into ideological tribes on. And the more it gets inflamed in the media and the more we talk about these things, it's like the Streisand effect. You just invite more of the behavior. I think we talked about it in our podcast.
We did.
Like just constantly talking about it. Not every issue, every issue is different, but I see some things as, and maybe it's a gradient, right? Some things are more important than others. And there's a lot of things I see that aren't super important that people get really hyper focused on. And I don't think it, from a strategic standpoint, it does much good towards our shared aims. I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. And let me maybe laser focus, because I think sometimes where libertarians will get in, and this is not us, by the way, I'm just talking about the general libertarian conversation, is that we get stuck in the grand platitudes, right? Mm-hmm. And then you bring in specific use cases or examples, and then that either is meant to try to invalidate the entire rule, or on the flip side, it's ignored as though it's not happening to possibly impact the rule, right? And I think when we start to really laser focus on the whole topic of kids, right? Kids mm-hmm. is where the conversation changes, at least for me, where, listen, if you're an adult, you're 18 plus, I don't care what you do. Like, I'm going to vocally argue against your beliefs if I think that they are backwards and they're going to hurt you in society. I'm not going to try to stop you from doing it, but I'm going to absolutely plant my flag and say, no, the very least, I want to be able to fast forward 100 years. And when people are looking back saying, what happened? They can see that there were people who were very adamant in saying, this is insane. This is crazy. But back to the idea of government force, as soon as you start to bring government force, you start to create unintended consequences, unintended incentive structures, right? We all acknowledge that. But when we talk about kids, we've always looked at kids in a different perspective because they, by just their very nature, they are innocent. They do not have developed brains. They are literal, like little mush human beings who are little sponges absorbing everything around them. And I fundamentally, principled stance and moral stance saying, I just think that's wrong when we start to bring the adult issues to children, or trying to create this impression that our values as adults are the same ideas and values that children have. So like an example, I have a 14-month-old. She loves Thomas the Tank Engine, absolutely loves it. I used to love Thomas the Tank Engine, right? But I'm not going to be a conductor, or I'm not a trained conductor when I'm 4 years old or I'm 14 months old. I'm a kid. And yet there are people that are in our world, in the libertarian world, who if they see a kid expressing themselves in such a way, they're like, oh, that's who that kid is. Versus they're a child. They are a sponge. They are reflecting back which their environment presents to them. And I get really frustrated when there are certain libertarians who they will let the overarching, and to your point, right, this utopian vision take over reality. And they almost refuse to live in reality and acknowledge that kids are kids and that we've always treated kids differently because they are children. So when we talk about this, and particularly let's bring it back to Chase, this is one of the main things that has been Chase's thorn in his side is, and there's a perfect example of this. He was over on the Just Asking Questions podcast with Zach Weissmuller, however you say his name, Zach from Reason, and Liz Wolf from Reason. Mm-hmm. And Liz asked Chase a very fair question about the whole idea of gender affirming care. And Chase kept on going back to the principled argument. And again, I'm using principled very loosely here. He was saying, well, this is a choice between parents, the kids, and their doctors. And she goes, okay, well, what if, it was a choice between a parent and a doctor that the kid needs to have their arm cut off? Like, is the state allowed to step in there and say no? And again, there was no answer. It was a kind of a round robin conversation going in circles. But this is a thing we have to acknowledge is a very real issue. And if we don't acknowledge it and don't address the fact that we've seen the number of kids who are now identifying as something other than their biological sex explode over the past 5 years, and not draw a direct correlation between that, what's happening in social media and the TikTok generation, mm-hmm. what's happening in the gender affirming care and the healthcare industry with all these, these quote unquote experts, the science, right, showing us that this is normal. This is the way things are supposed to be. You have all these different factors coming into play. And yet I see so many libertarians like a Chase plant their flag and say, no, this is just a healthcare issue, not acknowledging all the both cultural, moral, but also systematic institutional attacks that are happening on reality. And I think that's something that we need to grapple with.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you that it's a real issue, right? But I think it's a complicated issue. I had Jacob Weinegard on my podcast earlier this week, and we talked about essentially the same thing. And I land in the same place, is that it's a real issue and it causes real harms to real people. Like, that's just baseline. Anyone who says that this has no, potential negative consequences to people is absolutely insane. That said, one of the things I think libertarians could work on is consistency across the board, right? So when you're looking at the gender affirming care, quote unquote, issue, yeah, that's a real thing and it causes real harms to real people. But there's this elephant in the room, which is a lot of the same people that I've interacted with. It seems to me, anyways, I don't have data around this, but I notice a pattern. I'm pretty good at picking out patterns. A lot of the folks that are against whether it's, the culture war issues around, LGBT and gender affirming care, that sort of pocket, right? They seem to be driven, at least in some part, by religious conviction, right? They've got the particular religious belief that informs their overall worldview. And I think sometimes that is a problem because that is essentially driving it as opposed to sound moral philosophy, right? And the same people who are screaming about, hey, we need to protect these kids, we need to protect these kids, are hitting their kids, they're yelling at their kids, right? And they're calling themselves libertarian. And we have the data, right? We have tons of data. The trans thing is new. Like, we don't have hardly any data. Nobody knows what the long-term impacts are going to be. But we have tons and tons of data on spanking kids, on yelling at kids, on hitting kids. Like, it's infinite number of hard studies, like a Kaiser Permanente. By the way, if you know them, they're both an insurer and a healthcare provider, and they care deeply about reducing costs. That's where the ACEs study came from. If anyone knows about ACEs, it's around adverse childhood experiences and correlations with negative health outcomes. And they have some very, very strong data over like 50 years, tens of thousands of people, a huge cohort. Causes real harms, like really bad harms to children, right? And it causes really broken adults. And I don't see, matter of fact, not only do I not see the same people jumping up and down and saying we need to protect these kids, they're saying if you don't hit your kids, you're doing a bad thing, right? And also claiming the libertarian mantle. And it's not everybody, right? But there is a cohort in there. And so for me, like I said, starting and ending with ethical, sound moral philosophy and ethics, like man, you might help your cause if you were consistent, right? And so it's hard to take you seriously over here on an issue that may be driven by a religious belief.
Well, and Brent, really quick, let me just highlight something there that I think there is a little bit of distinction, right? Is that there is not a group of libertarians who are taking the spank your children plank and making that a leading part of their platform as a candidate, much as what Chase is doing with this idea of gender affirming care. And I think that speaks to where, and putting my sales hat on, right, where I start to cringe, because even if we want to go back to what you're saying, and I think you're absolutely spot on, like we have to be against harming children across the board. That's a no-brainer. But when you see one group of libertarians who they seem to be okay with it and pretend that it's a healthcare choice, and now they're leading with that as an underlying part of their platform, that's where I had to stand up and say, like, no, that's not what not only do I not believe in that, I don't believe in hurting your kids. I don't believe in spanking your kids. I don't believe in mentally abusing your children. I think that's across the board. Children are special because there's that inherent innocence with children. So that speaks to, I think, where I'm having a little bit of an issue is not so much, I agree with you. We need to be consistent in our stance against harming children. But when I see Chase leading with this whole idea of gender affirming care just being a healthcare decision between a doctor and parents and the kid, I'm just like, no, man, that's an excuse to validate this exception to a rule of potentially harming in the argument that they're making that it's actually helping preventing harm. And that's where it gets really backwards in my book.
No, and I agree. And like I said, I'm not trying to argue with you on this particular point. I'm trying to zoom out a little bit. And to your point, you're right. There's no libertarians that are making that a plank on a political party. I guess the thing that annoys me is that no libertarians are making it a plank that you should, make. For example, if you were to be consistent here, you would want to make hitting your kids illegal, right? You can't hit anyone else in society but a child. That's the only thing that's legal to do. And I don't see libertarians standing up and saying, like, no, we need to put an end to this, right? So it's more of like I said, this from a perception. You're big into sales, right? And you understand brand and you understand public perception, right? And so when you have that perception, whether it's true or not, I mean, it obviously is true in some cases and not in others, right? I don't know exactly how the split breaks down, but there are some people that are just driven by ideological, religious grounds and they will try to use libertarianism to sort of like shoehorn that in and sort of like sneak it in the back door. And I think people are onto some of that stuff, right? And I think that's what turns people off. And I think maybe I've got a different perspective here because I'm not religious. And by the way, and I've told everyone this, like I'm very supportive of religion. Christianity is a wonderful thing on net. Obviously, there's harms associated with that too. But I think it's a great thing for society. I think a lot of societal ills have been caused by the, ripping down of that sort of, liberal Western democracy informed by, Christianity, which had the tenet that, the individual is sovereign. Like that's really important. And I think moving away from that has caused a lot of societal harms. I think this is actually a result of some of that, right? So I'm not saying, I'm not trashing religion at all. I'm just saying, like, this is what I see as an outside observer. Is it I get this little weird feeling that's like, you're trying to play a game with me, right? Like, if you talk to the same person, they say, hitting kids, it's actually virtuous. Like, we must do that as good parents. Spare the rod, spoil a child. Like,
and Brent, let me just challenge a smidge here on this, because do you really see, like, and again, this might be my ignorance, because I don't see this. I don't see people going out of their way to validate or justify spanking their kids. And even if there was, they are in such a minority that I don't see them, especially when compared to the folks who go out and they are openly, dare I say, proudly promoting this idea that we need to not only bring gender affirming care to children, but the kids know best, right? And that's, I think, where the distinction is that am I not seeing it? I'm just not seeing this religious fervor in libertarianism trying to validate and justify hitting kids. I just don't see that.
Yeah, it's not on the surface, right? It's not something like people are like, hey man, I hit my kid today. Give me a like. Like, that's not what's going on. It's like, it's through discussions.
Why is that though? Why is that? And I don't mean to interrupt, but like, is that not because we inherently acknowledge that it's wrong, morally wrong? Like, it's not popular because it's wrong.
I don't think that. I think that there's actually a societal narrative that gets embedded, which is like, we all understand, not anymore. Things have shifted. And by the way, I'm old. I'm like almost 50, man. So I'm giving you old guy perspective, but it seemed like, at least when I was coming up and up until, maybe even, I haven't really focused too much on this recently, but the last 10 years or so, you talk to people and it's like, well, yeah, I spank my kids. Not very, but it's always like this thing where then they put the hand, like, not very often. And, I try it. That's probably not true. Like, if you actually get inside people's families, like, if you hit kids, you probably hit kids a lot more than you want to admit to. And so they've got this sort of dichotomy that goes on where it's like, yeah, I'm told that it's a good thing, but I also think everyone recoils from it, right? I think there's something in us that just knows you're not supposed to be hitting a kid, man. And so people always try to, like, well, I'm minimizing it. I don't do it very often.
Which I agree, by the way. I think you're right to that.
But if I talk to people, and these are like specific conversations I've had with tons of libertarians, I talk to people all across the board and about the specific issue. Like, there's two big ones, circumcision and spanking. Like, those, like, you start talking about those and you start uncovering some sort of gross stuff underneath. And I definitely talk to these people and they really push back. Like, no, it's in the Bible. I'm supposed to be hitting my kid, my parent. And then there's this weird thing that humans do psychologically, which is we normalize what we experience. So if you have a parent that does bad thing X to you, then if you talk to them, it's very weird because you actually aren't talking to the person. I'm not talking to Brian anymore. I'm talking to Brian's parent that's living in his head, right? Which excuses that behavior because it doesn't want to wrestle with the fact that the person who cared for me and brought me up actually did bad things to me. And so I think it's a very complicated topic, but I'm telling you, I definitely see it. I don't know who obviously the Libertarian Party is very big, or the Libertarian, movement is very large, and there's tons of people and there's a lot of variety. That's inherent in the concept of liberty, right? It's like, you can be who you want to be as long as we abide by these, particular tenets as far as force and fraud. So it's a big tent. But I've talked to lots of people, and it does seem that sort of the really religious component, at least in America, right? Invariably, when you have the discussion, then they start, well, no, it's actually fine. Like, yeah, I hit my kids, I spank my kids, and you got to do it. And if you don't do it, it's viewed as being almost abusive because you're being too lenient, right? Oh, you're just not giving any structure. There's no discipline. It's like, bro, like, you can provide structure and discipline without hitting and yelling at your kids. And so I've had these conversations a lot. And so maybe it's just I'm an outlier. I've connected with way too many of them. But there's definitely something to it. And I'm just telling you, like, from a marketing perspective, I think the consistency around these issues with respect to kids would go a long way towards making people feel comfortable, like, oh, you're actually legitimate because you're protecting kids across the board. So hey man, take it for what it's worth. That's just that's my 2 cents.
No, and I really appreciate that, Brent, because we do. I think this is where a lot of libertarians need to kind of get out of the echo chamber and start talking to real people, because we get so stuck in the isms. And I was on a podcast recently, on my buddy Randy Wilowski's podcast, and I went scorched earth on this. Like, the lack, and libertarians are notorious for this, is they let the ism take over the identity, and instead of going based on common sense and like true, like just living in a real world. And again, this goes to, if your ideas can't live in a real world, you don't have a vision, you have an ism. And that is where I think we have a lot of folks in our camp who they get stuck behind the ism to justify whatever gross behavior they might want to do. Now, I just want to go back to something you brought up. You mentioned that there is kind of like this instinctual, like you keep it down low if you do hit your kids, right? Like, oh, I shouldn't say that out loud. And this, I think this is where the real, I wouldn't say a disagreement. I don't think it's a disagreement. I just think this is my main point, right? Is that there's a reason people don't promote that openly, because there is an inherent social stigma. It's not good. And that's a good thing. I think stigma is a good thing. Like I used to, oh man, back when I was in college, I used to get so many folks mad at me because I would be like, this whole Amnesty International, like, end the stigma. I'm like, what? But stigmas are important because stigmas tell you when something is considered good or bad. And usually there's a reason behind that. So the fact that you're right, people aren't going out and openly screaming and celebrating hitting kids, that's good. That's a good stigma. I don't see that stigma when we're talking about bringing gender affirming care to kids, right? And that's, I think, where my main issue comes down to. And I agree with you. I think if libertarians want to have success, they have to promote this idea of ending harm for kids across the board. But then we go back, it's semantics, right? What's harm mean? And stigma, right? Stigma is where that harm is identified. If it became so obvious that gender affirming care, transing the kids is a bad thing inherently at its core, then there wouldn't be the celebration. There wouldn't be the promotion of this. And going back to Pride Month, I mean, we're recording here middle of June. That is something that it has made me frustrated beyond belief, because back 10 years ago, I was all about supporting my gay friends who wanted to be able to talk about, oh man, I've had a rough time being able to celebrate who I actually am. But they weren't doing that when they were 4 years old. They weren't doing that when they were 2 years old. They were 20, 22, 24. Like, I remember the conversations being so different just 10 years ago when I had a buddy of mine who we had a roommate who was talking about possibly exploring himself and trying to figure out, is he a boy or a girl? And we were all like, this is weird. If I were to have that exact conversation today, I would be a bigot. All of us would have been bigots for like being like, this is weird, because the stigma's gone now, right? And that is where I think as a society, I'm really nervous, Brent, because the more and more that we as a society get away from embracing reality, embracing what is actually right and what is actually wrong, it makes it more difficult to talk about the specifics, right? To your point, to talk about hitting your kids in conjunction with talking about the dangers and such and the harm of gender affirming care to kids. Like, we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. But when you remove the stigma and you make it so, well, just live and let live, do your thing, whatever you want, whatever floats your boat, right? Like, that's where you start to lose the ability to now talk about things, because the people you're talking to, they don't look at that as a big issue. They're like, well, dude, who are you? Are you a bigot? Do you hate gay people? Do you hate trans people? Are you transphobic? It's like, no, I'm not afraid of trans people. I'm afraid of what's going to happen to our society that doesn't embrace reality.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. And first of all, can we at least acknowledge this is a complicated topic?
Oh yeah,
I think I hear so many people on all sides of the issue. Just like, I got this crystal clear, bright. Like, I know the answer to this, and it feels so. And I think that's part of the reason it's being highlighted so much, is because it is so complicated, it is so divisive. And I don't know the answer, by the way. Like, I'm just giving my opinion. Like, I always take the Rick Rubin approach. Like, man, hey, this is my thoughts right now on this are a diary entry, man. This is just for right now. This is how I'm seeing it.
By the way, Brent, I think I'm a little heated on this topic in general. Right before we logged down, I read this story on, it was the Reddit r trans. Here, I'm going to share my screen really quick. Present screen. I love StreamYard. Love it. Not really. It was giving me headaches earlier today. Where is my page? Okay. My little one, 3 years old. 3 years old, started to express that she feels like a girl. She feels more like mommy than daddy. She is asked to be called a new name and wants to use pronouns of she, her. This is a little boy, by the way. It has been a few months since she changed her name. We want to make sure that if she is trans, she feels loved and supported. Is there anything we should do to help with this? We are respecting her name and pronoun choices and helping others to do so as well. She hasn't expressed any desire for a wardrobe change other than a few dresses, which she got before she changed her name. Thanks. Like, that right there, man, that just, it makes my blood boil, because I have a 14-month-old. I just couldn't imagine being this parent and putting this as my perspective, man. It makes me sick.
Yeah, that's really tough because you've got people that there's a couple components. I think on the left, particularly, if you look at the psychological traits of somebody who is on the left, right? Like they're over indexed on compassion, right? And so the bleeding heart liberal thing that's a real thing, right? And you can be in trouble getting either direction, right? Too far right and too rigid,
Preach.
or too wide up. Like there's got to be a conversation between left and right, right? And you have to sort of try to rein each other in, and that's a perfect example of how you can just completely get carried away in this stuff out of like a couple of things. Probably some sort of compassion for your kid who you think is going through a hard time, and number two, there's probably some social credit, right? Because if you're in that camp where there's a lot of this stuff going on and it's praised, right? Like, so there's no stigma, it's actually being praised, then you consciously or subconsciously insert and sort of steer a kid that might be talking like that, or be exposed to these ideas, and then decide like, I want to play with it, because that's what children do, right? You got children, right? They play with identity. They're trying things out. They're constantly evolving the personality. And at 3 years old, you are in no position to make a fundamental decision like this, as far as like, oh, I want to, it's like. And the fact that you don't have an honest conversation and talk through it on a 3-year-old level, and then maybe like, hey, like people always make the crazy, like, oh, if I identify as a fire truck, is that okay? Like you bring reality, and you can play, you can have fun with make believe and imagination and all that sort of stuff. But I think you can get in some trouble, obviously, if you just let that stuff run amok, right? So I'm not trying to say that there's no harms here or anything like that. Please don't. I don't want anyone to sort of take that away as well. But also, I'm also trying to lead with compassion and also remain empirical, right? So let's be evidence based, let's be science based as much as possible. Walk through the issues without. And I'm trying to maybe I'm just trying to thread an impossible needle, which is to try to not be inflammatory, because I see a real problem on this and other issues. When you raise the temperature to 8, the other side's got to go to 9.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got to go to 10. Like it's just the spiral is never ending. And I'm trying to be productive. Like I said, I'm trying to, aiming up is all about like trying to improve the world. And I don't think we improve the world by shouting at each other. But I also don't know how to have a productive conversation about this. And maybe that's why I'm trying. Right? Like I'm trying to be reasonable here. I'm trying to be the adult in the room, and like, man, can we talk to each other? And I think one of the problems is that we're not talking to each other. We're talking to people, like you said, the echo chamber thing. We're talking to people who believe like us. And then you stand around in a circle like King of the Hill with a beer. Yep. Like you're not saying anything. You're not providing anything helpful to the conversation, because it is such a, like we mentioned earlier, it's such a complicated conversation, such a really fraught with peril conversation. And we've got to sort it out somehow, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I don't exactly know how to do it. All I'm saying is like, I'm here, I'm at the table, I'm willing to have conversations with anybody, but I think we probably should be having conversations with people that are on the other side, the Chase Olivers of the world, and way more extreme than Chase, right? I think that's important. So we're talking to each other, not about each other and at each other. Does that make sense?
And it absolutely makes sense, Brent. And I'll add a caveat to that, is that I also think it's fundamentally important for us to have those conversations, but to do so and make sure 1000% that not you, but like the person in the conversation and the person you're speaking to are doing so in good faith, right? And this is where I think we've seen so many issues, is that you have one side who is trying to have a good faith conversation, and the other side is waiting for that one golden opportunity to just jump right in and get their ism pushed through. And I mean, Brent, I'm just going to, again, call it out for what I see, at least. That seems to be coming predominantly from the cultural left. It is like I look at where we are today, right? You look at the Gen Zs, who I think it's 25% of them identify as LGBTQ. That number was in the low single digits a generation before. That speaks to something is happening across the board, inherently like in a negative stance. And I just think we got to be able to talk about it. Now, I can enter into that conversation with a cultural leftist in good faith, but they're going to look at it as though I'm attacking, right? And go back a month ago, whatever it was, the whole, if you're a lady in the woods, you saw a bear or a man, right? Like I made a joke about that on Facebook. The feminazis jumped in, right? Like just like hair on fire. How dare you? You don't understand. I'm like, no. I do understand. Yes, I was being tongue in cheek, but do you want to have a real conversation about it? Of course not. Of course not. They want to lead with the emotion. And I don't know, man, like it's very difficult to build policy based on emotion because I don't know, in sales, I know that the two emotions that we like to sell on are fear and love. The love of what the value of the change is going to bring, or the fear of inaction from making a change. And I don't know, man. I'm not seeing a lot of love coming from these policy prescriptions, and I'm not seeing a lot of positive change in that world. I'm seeing a lot more confusion. I'm seeing a lot more chaos, and I'm just looking again to your point. Look at the empirical data we have. Something's not right when you have literal like generations of kids a generation later saying, I don't know what I am. And the only things that have changed are the way that they communicate and the power structures that are promoting this stuff, and the stigma being removed, right? That's where I'm just like, okay, well, we've entered into good faith conversations, but it's only one team that's playing in the good faith conversation standpoint. And I'm scared, by the way, Brent, because as soon as the right, and I'm going to use the cultural right here, realize across the board that the left's not in a good faith conversation, then what's going to keep the right from being a good faith conversation? What's going to stop them from saying, you know what? All right, here we go. Time to fight fire with fire. And that's where I get really scared, because as soon as we get to that point, what's stopping the cultural right from starting to take over institutions and now using government force, not just to stop the stuff that they see as immediate harm to children? Let's talk about maybe taking it a step further, right? What's to say the cultural right, to your concerns from a religious standpoint, don't start to bring some of the not so great stuff from religion to public policy and making everybody adhere to it? That's where I think I look at where we are right now, and I'm seeing the writing on the wall. And I'm not trying to draw a comparison between us and 1920s Germany, but my goodness, man, it makes my stomach go into knots just seeing where we are today.
Yeah, and I share your concerns, by the way. Like I
know you do. Yeah, I know you do.
About the state of just the world in general, particularly the United States, because obviously I live here. But what I will say is I think, this is just a fundamental difference in where you and I are swimming, right? Like you're doing your thing. You're on the policy side. You're on, like that's where you're at. You're trying to influence policy, trying to figure out how we can change things through political action. And I'm sort of really micro, and my whole focus is on how to be a better person, how to engage with people better, and to model that and try to encourage people to do the same thing. So what I would say is like maybe something that might help. I'm not saying this is a silver bullet, but maybe you reach out to people that have a completely different opinion on this topic than you do, and have a direct conversation, and then where you agree up front. Like you said, good faith conversation is important. Oftentimes, like I had this guy Eric Biggs on. He's a Marxist, right? Love the guy. He's great. We got off on the wrong foot, but because I didn't inflame, and I said, hey, like, come on the podcast, let's talk about things. And from the beginning, I said, we're going to agree that you and I are not adversaries in this discussion. We're partners, and we're searching for two things: what's true and what's good. So truth and virtue, that's our North Star. We might have a difference of opinion about what constitutes true and what constitutes good, but at least we're aiming the same direction, right? And let's have a discussion. And I think that helps to diffuse some of that emotionality that sometimes sidetracks these conversations. So I think, getting out of that bubble, man, like talking to ourselves is not going to do anything. It's not going to bring anything good to the table. I think ultimately thinking is a team sport as humans, right? We are distributed computers, right? I'm a tech nerd, right? So this is literally a distributed computational system, and each one of us is a node, and each one of us has things we know. There's things that we get wrong, and we need others to correct us, right? And we have to, and that's why people that are completely isolated go insane, right? Like by
the way, Brent, I don't mean to interrupt your train of thought, but like, not only do we need people to correct us, but you yourself need to be correctable. You have to be able to acknowledge, I don't know everything, and maybe I got some of this shit wrong.
Man, if I could tell everybody one thing, it would be embrace saying I don't know a hell of a lot more often. And I think this is maybe goes hand in glove with the idea of having less inflammatory conversation with people. How about you don't be a dick to people online? How about if, because it's so easy, especially on Twitter, just some snarky shit back, and then they pop back. And all of a sudden you see these, right? All of a sudden there's a thread that's like 700 responses over something as dumb. And it's like, no, human beings don't talk like this, right? Like just act like a decent person and be curious in the world and be humble and say like, man, this stuff is hard. We're all trying to figure it out together. Assume best intentions from your discussion partner, as opposed to, ooh, this tribal thing. Well, they're on the other side, so I'm gonna, and then you get your list of arguments over here and then you're just deploying art. You're not thinking. It's like somebody else has done the thinking. We have our set of arguments here. They have their set of rebuttals here, and it's just people might as well not even be involved in the conversation, because you can swap out me or Brian or who and put somebody else in that thinks exactly the same way, has the exact same set of arguments that's been teed up, and it's like you're not even part of the conversation, and that's really frustrating for me, because I think people can do a lot better. We can be so much better than we are. So that's, sorry for the side rant, man, but that's really something I'm passionate about.
And by the way, like, to the point of my show too, right? So yes, we want to build policy, but we also want to do what? Meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. And with that, I want to be able to take our ideas and sell them to, dare I say, the normies, right? The common sense folks out there, who are still out there, by the way, and they are in larger numbers than I think we realize. And understand that, yes, we can still have a dialogue with the folks who we disagree with and try to find that common ground. But I think we will find more success in selling our ideas to a group of folks who inherently are just aware that shit's not right? Like, something is broken inherently in our system, in our culture, in our politics, and we need a solution or solutions, both in terms of policy, but also those social and moral prescriptions that have been completely forgotten. Now, I'm not saying we need to bring those in from a government perspective, but we need to be able to talk about them, right? And be comfortable in selling those solutions. And who is it? Ben Shapiro on his show, love him or hate him, I don't care. But he had a great line. And he said, get ready for revenge of the normies. And I think he's right, because there are so many folks out there who just look at the way that the country's gone, the way that our culture has gone, and they're just saying, nope, I am not doing this. I just saw a video. It was a baseball game. I think it was a high school baseball game. The announcer says, we are not going to sing the national anthem. We're going to go ahead and get the game started, play ball. And what happened? The entire crowd stands up and starts doing the national anthem on their own. Now, I can see the libertarians, oh, look at them worshiping the sky cloth. Good for them. Oh, the bunch of drones, right? Good job. Congratulations. You feel good about making your statement. On the left-hand side of the aisle, look at all those racist bigots. They're worshiping a country that hates minorities, and they hate Gazans, like all that fun shit that we've been seeing on the social media. And then what's there, Brent? There is the normal person who says, it's a group of folks who just want to show that they're proud of the country they live in, and they want to sing the national anthem, and they don't want to be told one way or another that they're crazy for just being a normal person from 20 years ago. And that is the person I have built my show around, trying to sell these ideas to, because I do see that there is this desire for the common sense extremist, right? Like, please bring back some common sense to Washington. That's why I look at people like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul and Mike Lee and Vivek Ramaswamy. I look at them with a positive lens versus some folks in our LP who look at them as just next door to Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi. Like, if you cannot fundamentally acknowledge that the first group is inherently better than that second group, then I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to build too many bridges with you or help build a better solution for our future with you. I want to coalesce with people who at the very least acknowledge we have problems. We need to bring some solutions to the table, both policy-wise, cultural, moral, but we don't do so through the threat of force or government violence, but we do so by helping change people's minds. Yes, meet them where they're at on the issues they care about. Lead with empathy, but also lead with your values. And don't be afraid of speaking what you believe, because the more that we speak out and we talk about what we actually believe, I dare say it gives more people out there who believe the same thing, but are sitting quietly to do the same. Because Brent, we only need to go back 10 years ago, cancel culture, the Me Too's, like all that nonsense was taking place, and people were being removed from society and polite conversation left and right. So it led to a lot of folks sitting on their hands being like, yeah, I'm just going to sit down, shut up, go to work, not say shit, 'cause I don't want to ruin my family, don't want to ruin my life, don't want to ruin my career aspects. And now we see people like Jennifer Say, who is like, hey, Levi, what the hell are we doing trying to mess up like our approach to marketing to women we shouldn't be doing this. And they're like, well, that's a little bigoted. And then she's like, well, what about this whole COVID insanity? What are we doing here? Why are we making a COVID mandate for Levi? And they're like, now you're getting a little too snippy there, Jennifer. She's like, fine, screw you. And she leaves, right? People like her, people like Elon Musk, love him or hate him, saying, you know what? I'm going to put $44 billion into Twitter to make it a solution that I see as a value to our public discourse. There are people now who are standing up and saying enough. And I want to at least talk to those folks and say, well, what's the feedback you're getting? And why did you get to the point where you are, where just a short decade ago, we were all terrified of even speaking out? So I said a lot there. I'm going to say that's my final thoughts for today, Brent. How about this? Give us your final thoughts. Bring us home. Where did I get things wrong? Where did we get things right? What do you want the audience to take away from the episode today?
Yeah. I'm not going to focus on what I think you got wrong or right, because number one,
there's too much.
No, it's not too much. I think honestly, sincerely, I think that on some of the issues we talked about today, I don't feel confident enough in where I'm at, right? I don't have a strong view, like this is the absolute solution, right? I'm going to zoom out a little bit and get meta, right? And I'm really going to encourage you to do this and anyone else, because you're like, hey, yeah, revenge of the normies, cool. Well, guess what? How do you change somebody's mind that might have a fundamentally opposite opinion as you on a particular topic, a particular view? How would you do that? You wouldn't do it by, talking to people that think exactly like you, right? You would go to that camp that's most diametrically opposed to you and have a public discussion, put it on YouTube, and then those people that might be only listening to that person's material, right, and just getting straight, like we talked about the ideology, they're getting their list of arguments, they like that might be the only time that they're actually hearing a strong rebuttal, or at least a questioning of the thesis they're putting forward, right? And so by virtue of having these conversations, number two, I think you drop the temperature, right? Because it's very difficult to have a face-to-face conversation like you and I are having, even if you fundamentally oppose and then just hate each other, right?
I hate you. Yeah, no
happen.
Anakin Skywalker's hating Obi-Wan here today.
So I think that's really important. I think I'm going to focus on doing that more. I've had like a whole string of libertarians on my podcast. Like I love it. I love these people, and I'm just like I really
say I'm sorry.
No. I love it. I do. But it's that whole thing. Like I'm trying to reach out to people that think differently than me, because number one, I don't think I know everything. I think there's something valuable to gain from their input, and I think they have something to learn from me as well, right? And so I'm really going to focus on that. I would encourage everyone to do that. It's like, stop being a dick online. Like, try to engage with people with curiosity. Like, maybe you ask, like, oh, that's cool, we have a difference of opinion, why do you think that? If you start a conversation that way, I think you're going to get a lot farther towards repairing some of these high level things that you're worried about fixing, right? So I think people need to take responsibility, and we talked about this probably on the podcast, which is around personal responsibility and liberty. Those two concepts are hand in hand. Like, we've got to not point at a politician and say, fix my life. We got to be like, hey, we're all in this together. Let's have some important discussions, and let's try to be decent to each other and kind to each other and curious about each other's views. And let's talk about things and stop throwing the flames, man, because it's not doing any good. Yeah, I don't, like I said, I have no solutions. It's a very complicated, space to work in, but that's just my high level, like mental model around it. And I just encourage people to do it, because I know when I adopted that, a lot of my interactions changed and things got better. I learned a whole lot more. I created better relationships with people that are on different sides of particular issues. I felt like I better understood where they're coming from. Oftentimes we build up a straw man of some stupid thing we think somebody believes, and you actually talk to them, you get a completely different story. So it builds understanding, it builds trust, it builds empathy, and I think we need more of that in the world. And so keep doing what you're doing, man. Like, I think that you have a valuable position here. You're doing something important in that space you're swimming. It's just, that's my mental model. This is kind of where I'm coming from, very much bottom up, starting with myself. And just trying to encourage people to just be better to each other. And I think we can, maybe we can't fix everything. There's always be problems. We're human. But I think we can make it better.
Agreed. No, and by the way, like, nothing you said I disagree with. I just want to call that out. One of the little mottos I like to promote here in the show is the good people bring out the good in people. I want inherently a society of better people, of more good people. But I just want to, just one thing you said there, Brent, maybe this is where the I don't want to say the disagreement. It's not even a disagreement. It's just a different tactics. Is that for you're talking about like going out and talking to the folks that we disagree with, and it's more so what's the outcome from that? It's the folks who are watching that. So you're not saying we're going to go in and talk to the Marxist and get him to be a libertarian. You're going to talk to the Marxist, get the ideas out there, your ideas and his ideas, and then to the broader audience, that could be their entryway, right? Their gateway drug into libertarianism. But my perspective, and this is more of my tactic, right, is I get that, and I see value in that. But I also see a lot of value in going after the folks who I identify this as our ICP, right? Our ideal customer persona, our ideal voter persona, if you're going into libertarian politics, and understanding who that Bob is, right? Like, who is Bob? What does Bob believe in? And is Bob more likely to jump on board with our ideas first versus the left? If so, that's my ideal persona that I'm going to target. And I kind of look at it in that perspective because I want to help create a culture of liberty with folks who are inherently already kind of leaning towards our way of doing things. And my gut's telling me that that's going to be more of that common sense extremist, that normie who looks at where we are today and they say, dude, 20 years ago, like, this wasn't even on the radar. And slippery meets slope. Like, here we are. How did we get here? I can talk to that person. I can say, hey, I totally hear you, man. Like, I'll empathize with you. I'll walk through how we got here with you and where you personally went through your journey. But to the leftist, I think they're going to find that there's nothing wrong with this. This is great. What are you talking about? Like, people can express themselves for the first time and they're not afraid to live their life as who they are, right? Like, we've heard the platitudes. And I think that is where it's not a matter of, one side's better than the other. It's a different tactic. And I actually think to this conversation, here we go, Brent, here's how we're going to wrap this up in a nice, neat bow. We need both, right? We need folks like you going out and having the conversations with the lefties who you're going to help bring their audience to the table and change some minds there, right? Get the folks who are maybe more of the militant leftists, maybe not to be as militant, right? Maybe they're just the soft, squishy leftists. I can work with that. Or at the very least, I don't have to be concerned with that. Whereas I'm more so going after who are the folks that are the low-hanging fruit? Who are the folks that we can get from where they are today to at least more on our side based on principles and understanding of commonalities to start building a coalition more or less with us, right? And in that nature, prove out our values by the solutions we bring to the table, both policy-wise and morally and culturally. Show them that we can make things better, but do it incrementally. Now, I know incrementalism in the libertarian world is just like one of the worst things ever, but I do see that kind of being the way we make some progress in the actual progress, not the leftist, pushing people off a cliff progress or lining them up against a wall. But that's a different conversation for a different day. Brent, we are already over time by like 25 minutes. I'm so sorry I kept you longer than I promised. I know we're recording here on Father's Day weekend, so I know you got to get back to playing dad. I do too. So how about this? Let's go ahead, make sure folks can go ahead, support your podcast, the Aiming Up podcast, which, yes, yours truly was on back a few weeks ago. So where can folks go ahead and find you, support you, and check out your awesome show?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's just at Aiming Up Podcast on all the socials, Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, wherever, man. So at Aiming Up Podcast.
Love it. Brent, this has been a great conversation. And I know folks in the audience, they get value from these types of conversations as well. So if you did, in fact, get some value, folks, please go ahead, give today's episode a share when you do. Tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, all the social medias. You can find the Brian Nichols Show over there. Brent, we have a B Gets Better. That's your handle, right? For X,
Twitter, yeah.
Twitter, yes, Twitter, X, whatever the hell Elon's calling it. And then at Aiming Up Podcast, both of those links are going to be available in the show notes. Please go give Brent some love. Go give his podcast some love. And frankly, Brent, I love what you do because I was kind of doing that and I got burnt out. I had one episode back 2019. Yeah, 2019. It was called Ask a Democratic Socialist. And I had one of my buddies on the show who's a raging Bernie bro. And I curated a bunch of questions from the audience to ask him. Like, we played that game and I got burnt out. And I started to find solutions being a better route for me personally. And I was like, please say that there's somebody else out there who's going to be able to do what I was doing without getting burnt out. And there you come. So thank you for that. And any final words for the audience today, Brent?
Just please prove me wrong, folks. Or like maybe the sense that I might be being a little overly naive in my approach. prove me wrong. I would love to be proven wrong. I would love to see that there's actually value in taking the approach I'm taking. So, but I agree. There's space for both of us, man. We're both doing a different thing. And I love you, man. I consider you an ally for sure, top to bottom. So
likewise, brother, for sure. All right, folks, that is going to wrap up today's episode. Again, please go ahead, give us some love on the podcast and video versions of the show. Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it is you get your podcasts. And for the video version of the show, YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Facebook. We're uploading the entire video version of the show in their entirety over on those platforms. Across the board, just give us some love. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the little notification bell so you don't miss a single episode that is brand new to your RSS feeds. Head down below into the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. Am I completely out to lunch? Is Brent completely on the right path here? Or is it vice versa? Or heck, do we both bring some good points here to the table? I think it's the latter. Go ahead and let us know down below in the comments. And of course, if you are listening to us on the podcast version, beyond hitting download all unplayed episodes, which is, yes, where you can access all 860 episodes of the program. But also, please go ahead and give us a 5-star rating and review. That helps us and the podcast gods reach more people across the board. We really appreciate it. And you would join literally the hundreds of other folks who've already rated the show. 5 stars would be appreciated. And one final plug, please support the folks who support us, our amazing sponsors, Cardio Miracle, Amp America, Ebles, CBD, Liquid Freedom Energy Tea, and more. All those sponsors found at our homepage, briannicholsshow.com, or attached with today's episode in your podcast catcher. That's all we have for you. Brent, any final words as we wrap things up today?
Just be kind to people out there. That's my main thing, man. Like, search for the good, search for the true, and be nice to people, man. That's where we start. Love you, man.
Good people bring out the good in people. Yes, be kind, be good. And with that, thank you for joining us here on the Brian Nichols Show. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off for Brent from the Aiming Up podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.